This is OTR FM, part of the IOM radio network.
Welcome to Cracked, the podcast, the program that slays the dragons of mental health by stripping away the shame, embarrassment, fear, and stigma. Because mental health isn't something that affects just some of us, it applies to all of us. Here to shine a new light on areas of mental health that often go unvisited are your hosts, Rebecca Shaper and Sandy Sedgbeer.
Hello and welcome to Crack the Podcast, Slaying the Dragons of Mental Health with me, Sandy Sedgbeer.
And me, Rebecca Shaper.
And with us this week is former Washington Post reporter, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, and Pulitzer Prize finalist Pete Earley, who is the author of 21 books, including 4 New York Times bestsellers, including The Hot House, Life Inside Leavenworth Prison, and the 2007 Pulitzer Prize finalist, Crazy, A Father's Search Through America's Mental Health Madness. Pete Earley, welcome. Pete, you'd written extensively about crime, punishment, and society during your 30-year career, but you'd always been on the outside looking in. You had no idea what it was like to be on the inside looking out until your son developed a severe mental illness and was arrested. So tell us what happened.
Finally, Kevin said, there's nothing wrong with me. I'm going to leave. I said, hang on. And I literally went out and grabbed a doctor. And I'll never forget how he came in. He came in with his hands up as if he was surrendering. He said, I'm sorry, Mr. Earley, I can't help your son. I said, you haven't even examined him. He said it didn't matter. The nurse had told him my son thought all pills were poison. And the law in Virginia at that time was that unless a person was in immediate, imminent danger to themselves or others, they couldn't be required to take any kind of medication or treatment. And the fact we'd been sitting there for 4 hours was proof there was no imminent danger. So he said, you seem like a concerned father. Bring him back after he harms you or hurts you or someone else. Well, I was devastated. I took him home, and during the next 48 hours, I watched Kevin fall deeper into a mental abyss. At one point, he had tin foil wrapped around his head to keep the CIA from reading his thoughts. He got up early one morning. He left my house. He broke into a stranger's house. Luckily, no one was there. He broke in to take a bubble bath to cleanse himself. It took 5 police officers to get him out. And when they did, they took him over to a mental health center and called me, and I went racing over. And a policeman was outside, and he said, Mr. Earley, even though your son has told us he's been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, even though he's told us he's off his medication, even though we picked him in a stranger's house taking a bubble bath, unless you tell the psychiatrist in there he's threatened to harm you or kill you, he will not meet the immediate danger criteria, and he will end up going to jail, and you don't want that. So I do this with no pride. It hurt my relationship, but I went in and lied. I said my son had threatened to kill me. And that was good enough to get him held over for 48 hours and get him into a hospital. But my son at that point had become one of the 365,000 Americans who are sitting in jails and prisons. One of the 2.2 million with serious mental illness who are booked into jail every year, and the more than 1 million who are on probation. And I thought at that point, phew, at least I have him safe. But I certainly didn't want him caught up in the criminal justice system. I was able to get him out of the hospital, but he faced 2 charges, breaking and entering and destruction of property.
Wow.
Pete, do you have any idea what triggered your son Mike's mental health issue? And were there any signs earlier in his life that you later thought you may have missed? I'm just curious about that.
Well, Rebecca, of course, that's one of the first things you do as a parent is you look back and say, where were those warning signs? What did I miss?
Yeah.
And there weren't that many. Kevin always marched to his own drumbeat. He's very, very artistic, which now a lot of people believe that someone who is artistic is also on the fringe often of mental illness or thinking outside the box. Not that all artists are, but it seems historically that this is kind of a pattern with a lot of people with bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
It emerged during his senior year in college, and we often know, he was 22, we often know that these are when these illnesses emerge. I talked to Tom Insel when he was the head in the United States of the National Institutes of Mental Health, and he told me, I felt guilty. I thought, well, maybe I was putting too much pressure on him. You know, I expected him when he graduated from art school to get a job. When you get a degree in portrait painting, it's kind of hard to find a job. But anyway, I was putting pressure on him. And Tom Insel said to me, no, this was genetically based. And what he said was that it's like an electrical cord to a lamp. There's one part of the electrical cord that's thinner than the rest. And for years and years, nothing happens. But at some point, that flares up and starts a fire. And he said, I believe that's what happened to your son.
Wow.
Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has the genetic component, but it seems probable that with serious mental illnesses like bipolar disorder and especially schizophrenia, that it's genetic, it's in the code. And we cannot change that. What we can do is find ways to help these people. And of course, one of the obstacles I ran into was our legal system. And this is true in England, is true in the United States, is when do you step in and help someone?
Yeah. And that's a fine balance too.
Right.
Yeah.
And I also, so my book kind of ends with the first year when he's been hospitalized. We've dealt with these criminal charges, and he's doing well. But the National Institutes of Mental Health did a study. It said most people with bipolar disorder will take their medication. And in my son's case, medication really helps him for about 2 or 3 years, and then they go off. And that's exactly what happened with Kevin. He wouldn't take his medication. And I asked him why. And he said, well, I've gained, 40, 50 pounds. I can't drink. And, when you're in your 20s, some people like to drink. I can't have sex. He said, these are important to me, so I don't want to take it. They make me feel bad. So I said, well, look, you got to take this. And he was hospitalized again. So then I decided I would use logic. I took a pad of paper and I drew a line down it. And on one side, I put when you're doing well, and the other side, when you're not doing well. And I said, oh, look, when you're doing well, you're taking your medication. And I discovered you can't talk logic to someone who's not thinking logically. So then I tried bribery. I said, Kevin, I'll give you $50 a week if you would take your medication. And he looked at me and he said, Dad, I'm not a prostitute. So then I tried duplicity. While he was asleep, I got up early one morning and he liked to eat cereal, and I ground up his medicine and put it in the cereal. This is how desperate parents can be. And he came out, and what we discovered was that his medication floated. And he looked at it and he said, what is this pink Depakote shell here? So then he got angry. So I said, okay, I'm the father. If you want to live in my house, you have to take your meds. And he said some rather unpleasant vulgarities and demanded that I drive him to my ex-wife. On the way over, we got in an argument and he jumped out of the car. So he went back to her. A few days later, I got a call from her and she said, he's acting strange. I'm worried. So where I live, they have a mobile crisis response team. You call this team and they're supposed to come over and assess someone. And if they have a serious mental illness, try to get them help before they break the law
Right.
or end up worse. So I called that team. I said, look, my son is not taking his medication. He's acting strangely. And they said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Is he dangerous? And I said, no, he's not dangerous yet. But last time, and they said, no, it doesn't matter what last time happened. That's prejudicial. Call us when he's dangerous. Well, a few nights later, my ex-wife was locked in the bathroom saying, please, please, please come. And I raced over there, and Kevin threw me out of the house. He chased me out of the house. He was screaming and yelling. So I called that very same dispatcher. Now, what am I going to say? Of course, I'm going to say he's dangerous. He's kicked me out of the house.
Right.
So I called, and very same dispatcher, and I said, please come. My son is violent. And I made a mistake because the dispatcher said, is he violent or is he dangerous? And I said, he's violent. And he said, oh, we don't come if they're violent. You call the police. So the police came, and they shot my son twice with a taser and took him away. Now, by that time, I'd written a book. I knew all these people in mental health. I still could not get my son help. Now imagine that. I worked at the Washington Post. I had connections. One of my friends was Mike Wallace from CBS, who had a mental illness. I still couldn't get him. What chance does someone who has no political connections, has no money, has no information, what chance do they have?
None whatsoever. None whatsoever.
And that's why it's so important to have programs like yours and others to go out there and say, hey, this happens to anyone. It happened to me. It can happen to you. And we can't keep locking people up in America in our jails and prisons when what they need is help. Because we know that most people with serious mental illness can be helped. The earlier you help them, the better, and they can live productive lives. And that after 5 years or 6 years and 5 hospitalizations, that finally we reached a point where my son did get help.
Wow. Hey, I just want to backtrack a little bit. On a personal level, you decided you were going to investigate this whole arena, and you spent 10 months inside Miami-Dade County Jail as a reporter. Right. And you followed prisoners in there with mental disorders, through the criminal justice system to track what happened to them. It's one thing for you as a reporter to be in that prison, doing that, for a book that you're writing. As a father, that must have crucified you.
I still think it's tough for me to talk about it. But what I looked at was, what can I do to help my son? And I wasn't just doing this for being nice. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to write stories. I wanted to go in jail because I wanted to make sure that people knew my son mattered, and I was looking over their shoulder. So even though I couldn't keep him from being tasered, I was so outraged that he had been arrested and had these charges against him that I decided to go in jails and prisons, because that's where people with mental illness in the United States are ending up. You get 365,000. So I spent 10 months in Miami. It was the only place that I could get into. Washington, New York, LA, Chicago are all called the biggest mental health facilities, and they wouldn't let me in because they didn't want me to see. Let me tell you what I found there. The suicide wing was 19 cells. They all faced a corridor in the middle where the officers walked up and down. They all had plexiglass fronts. And because of a design flaw, cold air was blowing in. It was stopped by the plexiglass. None of these people had any clothes on. All of their clothes were off, and it was freezing in these cells. Because medication makes you thirsty, you want to drink water. But the jail was old, and often the water system broke down. So you saw men drinking out of toilets. And the first time I was in there, I heard a sound. It was a bang, and then louder, bang, and then faster, bang, bang, bang. It was one of the prisoners banging his head into the plexiglass and screaming. And the officer outside said, "Quit acting like you're crazy." None of these officers had any training to deal with persons with mental illness. And what I discovered during that 10 months was that they often beat the prisoners because that was one way to control them. It was a horrific nightmare scene. Fortunately, after my book came out, the judge who let me in that prison was so outraged that he got the community involved, and now they've closed that floor and completely made their jail system a model for how things should be.
Wow, that says a lot about you and just your perseverance and
Yeah.
But I didn't really answer your question. I'm sorry.
But
It
it
was
must
really,
have been hard.
yeah.
really, really difficult.
Yeah.
I remember one night, I could go anytime I want. I went in. These cells were designed for 2 people. There would be 4 or 5 people in them because they had nowhere else to send anybody, because all of the hospital beds, state hospital, mental hospitals had been closed in the 60s and 70s because they were such horrific places. So it was everybody was in jail because there were no hospitals, right? I remember seeing 4 guys in a cell, and I knew there were supposed to be 5 in a cell, even though they were built for 2. I got down on my knees and I looked, and under the steel bunk, there was this man all crouched down, eating orange peels, babbling to himself. And I thought, that could be my son. This is how things could end up. And I just went back and I stood in the shower in my motel room and I just sobbed.
Oh.
Because at that point in Kevin's life, he was being repeatedly hospitalized, repeatedly getting in trouble, and repeatedly, refusing to believe that he was ill. And as a parent, I hate to admit this, so I always have to talk about what happens eventually, but I honestly thought, would have been better if he'd not been born, if his life is going to be with mental illness, in a jail, homeless, on the streets. What future does he have?
Mm-hmm. Yes. A question for you, Pete, is what finally tipped the balance for Mike from him being resistant to acknowledging he had a problem and being willing to get help?
So after his 5th hospitalization, he woke up. But let me tell you what led to that, please.
Oh, yes, please.
So what happened was Kevin knew that it was Thanksgiving. By this time, Kevin is almost 28 years old. And he knows he's off his meds. He knows I know he's off his meds, and he's worried I'm going to call the police. So he runs out and gets in his car and goes driving off. And I call him on his cell, and I call, and he won't answer. And then finally he answers, and I said, "Where are you going? What are you doing?" And he said, "I'm going to heaven," and hung up. Well, of course, that alarmed me.
Sure.
Well, 4 hours later, he ran out of gas in North Carolina. So he called me, and I said, "Well, look, I'll come get you." "No, don't come get me." "Well, go to a gas station. I'll give it credit card numbers, or just get some gas." He says, "No, Dad, no, you don't understand. If I step out of this car, I will die. The voices are telling me I will die." Now, that's nonsense, of course, but if your mind was telling you if you walked out of the room you're in and you die, you wouldn't leave that room. So I did what no father should do. I arranged for him to get gas. He drove back completely psychotic for 4 hours, went off the road twice. Luckily, wasn't stopped. And I said, look, I'm tired of fighting with you. I want to be your partner, just not only your parent. What do you want? He said, there's a safe house I heard about where you can go in and just spend the night if you have a mental illness. I said, great. So I took him to the safe house, checked him in. Well, he got up middle of the night and he took off all his clothes because, you know, if you take off your clothes, you're invisible. And he went walking down the street. But listen to what happened to him this time. This time, a police officer who was trained in what's crisis intervention team training, which teaches police officers about mental health, saw him and he said, hey, buddy, it's not good to be walking down the street naked like this. Why don't we go to the emergency room? And Kevin said, don't handcuff me. That's when I got tasered. I'm not a criminal. Well, the officer used his discretion and invited him into the back of the squad car without handcuffs. And then the officer said to him, what kind of music you like? Oh, I like rap. He found a rap station and turned it on. He treated him with respect. They got to the emergency room and Kevin actually got out and said to the officer, hey, this is better than a taxi ride. Thank you.
Yeah.
When the doctor there said, well, he's not dangerous, that CIT officer actually said, well, I'm going to look up where you live and I'm dropping him off on your front lawn. Well, all of a sudden, my son got admitted. And then he got a case manager, and this woman saved his life. She said to him, I don't think it's good that you're living with your father. Let's find you a place to live. And she put him in an apartment with 2 people with schizophrenia. Then she said, what do you want to do with your life? And he said, well, what can I do? I have a mental illness. She said, knock it off, control the illness. We'll find you a job. And then she said, why don't you take medication? Do you know of my son's 7 psychiatrists, only 2 have ever bothered to learn anything but his symptoms? And, you know, that's it. That's because they're trained to just issue pills.
Right.
We got a doctor actually talk to him and they found a medication that actually helped. And then when my son woke up in the hospital and he met this woman, he looked around and he said, I can't kid myself anymore. I have a mental illness. So he was willing to cooperate with her. You know, the doctor scared him. He said, you're actually killing parts of your brain with each breakdown. And my older son had our first grandchild, and they said, if you're not on your meds, we aren't going to. But it was his decision. So he got a job. Now, at this point, my son's almost 30. He's the bag boy, he goes around outside a store that sells lumber with getting the grocery carts, getting that. And he gets depressed. Everyone else in his life is moving on, but he's stuck. And his case manager sees him one day and says, man, you're doing great. And he goes, are you making fun of me? No, come to my group. And he went to her group. And he realized when talking to him, he was doing great. He was a success story. He was stable. And she said, I have the perfect program for you. I want you to become a peer support specialist, a person with mental illness who helps other people with mental illnesses. And he did. And all of a sudden, Rebecca and Sandy, he went from someone who was pitied and needed help to someone who could help others. And it was like a flip of a switch. And today, my son works full-time for the county as a peer specialist helping people with mental illness. He earns a livable wage. He lives independently. And just this year, he got his master's degree in social work. So don't tell me that people with mental illness can't get better. When you provide them with hope, when you provide them with housing, when you provide them with a job or a sense of purpose, and they want to change, they want to get better, then the majority of them can. But it starts with them accepting that their illness and showing them the services they need to get better.
And also, they have to trust. They have to trust who's trying to help them. Yeah. I understand your story a lot because a lot of that happened with my brother, Carl, with schizophrenia. But wow.
I'm going to hold it there because we really do need to go to break. You're listening to Crack the Podcast with me, Sandy Sedgbeer, and my co-host, Rebecca Shaper. And our guest this week is former Washington Post reporter, award-winning journalist, best-selling author, Pete Earley. And we're talking about his Pulitzer Prize-nominated book, Crazy, A Father's Search Through America's Mental Health Madness. We'll be back with more from Pete Earley after this short break.
The Real Conscious Connection. Om Times Radio. IOM FM. Om Times Magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Om Times, co-creating a more conscious lifestyle.
Hello, I'm Sandy Sedgbeer, host of Om Times Magazine's flagship radio show, What is Going On? My passion is sifting through information, research, and innovations from new thought teachers, speakers, and researchers, pushing back the boundaries of what we know about life, energy, metaphysics, and the universe. I love shifting perceptions about who we are, why we're here, and how quickly impossible becomes normal when we open our minds, expand our awareness, and accept that the only limits that exist are those we place upon ourselves. So if you're the kind of forward-thinking, eager investigator of what lies beyond the current reality that most perceive, why not make a date to come play with me in the field of possibilities at 4 p.m. Pacific Time, 7 p.m. Eastern Time every Thursday, and together we can discover what's really going on. Welcome back. Rebecca, you said something earlier just before the break about trust. And Pete, you've experienced this, that once your son Kevin had people who treated him with respect and were willing to help him and give him, tangible things that he could do to improve that, he then trusted them. So say a little bit more about trust and why it's so lacking in this arena.
Well, it's essential. It's difficult when someone is not thinking clearly, someone who is in the midst of a psychotic break. But I even think that there's no scientific evidence that shows this. And we do know that some people, when they're psychotic, can be dangerous. But I think with my son, deep down, he had a sense of who was trying to help him and who wasn't. And I saw this when I was in the jail too, that there's kind of a, kind of an unsaid, kind of a self-protection thing, I think, where you can tell if someone's trying to hurt you or help you. One of the things I learned with my son was it was pointless to argue with him when he was psychotic. If you argued with him, you were the enemy. It did me no good trying to, tell him about his delusions. It was better to try to wait until he was calm and I could kind of get to the sane part of his brain and then try to form a partnership. Okay, how are we going to do this? What can we do? How can we work together to do this? I think that's essential, especially when it comes to a parent. But you also have to realize in my son's case, it was the case manager who really formed that bridge with him, because although he knew that I loved him, he also knew that I had tried all these things that had failed. And so I think he trusted her more than me.
Well, that's an interesting point, and you can both answer this one because you've both had this experience. But the other side of trust is that as a parent, you may not have trusted him. You're constantly on tenterhooks, wondering when he's going to fall off the wagon again, or, can you trust them to leave them alone? And that must also, people aren't stupid. They know when someone doesn't trust them. And that can make it very hard for them.
Absolutely.
Yeah. it goes both ways.
Yeah.
Paul had to trust us and so that we could trust him as well. And it takes time. And when you build that trust, to me, it was just a gift.
But it must be the hardest thing for you as a loved one to be able to do.
Yeah.
I was fortunate. I felt like a load had shifted off my shoulders when I finally got a case manager involved. First of all, she knew how to deal with mental illness. And although as an observer in the jail and stuff, I observed it, I didn't really know how to help my son. I had attended organizations like the National Alliance on Mental Illness to learn more about it, but she was the expert. So I felt like that was a load off. But the biggest thing was, before she got involved in those early years, if my son started crying, I'd think, is he off his meds? Is he off his meds? If he started laughing, I'd go, is he off his meds? Is he off his meds? Mm-hmm. And he felt like I was constantly judging him. There's that old joke in mental health circles that if anyone else goes and buys a lottery ticket and says, I'm going to win $1 billion, everybody goes, good luck. But if someone with mental illness does it, then you're thinking, does he really believe that? Does she really believe that? Should we be concerned? Mm-hmm. And having a professional who cared enough to develop a relationship with him really took a lot of that off my back. And I was able to say or communicate with her, because she was also willing to talk to me within limits about what was going on with him. And that was essential, because we have a law in the United States that forbids, one of the biggest excuses for not delivering services is what we call the HIPAA law. And it's made to protect people's privacy with their medical information. But we have parents in the United States who frantically drive their kids to an emergency room, and then the hospital won't even admit that they're there. So I was lucky because Kevin trusted me enough to sign waivers and let me be part of his healing process, which goes back to what you're saying about trust.
Also, too, did you find that the communication with the social worker, I found with Carl, we communicated on where he was. Was he stable? Was he able to do other chores or clean his room or whatever? I felt it was extremely important to communicate with the social worker, because to me that was part of the healing process. But I never knew about his medication.
Yeah, what you said is just so essential. The caseworker, and they're still friends today, Kevin and his caseworker. The caseworker had a better grasp of what he could and could not do, and so could his stepmother. I was so worried about him that after going through all these horrific experiences, that I was putting limitations on him. Yeah. And his stepmother said to me, well, he's perfectly capable of paying these bills or getting his own place. And between the two of them, they really guided me, because as a parent, my immediate was to enable him to, can you really do that? Or are you feeling okay? I remember I used to really frustrating, because I'd say to him almost every day, well, how are you doing? Are you doing okay? Which implies that he's not doing okay. And I had to learn that.
I totally get it. My question to you, and then Sandy can ask. You put a lot of your life into his healing process, trying to find people who would help him. And that takes a toll. I want to know, and if you could also explain to the audience, what do you do now to take care of you? I feel that's so important, because you were definitely a caretaker. And I found out the hard way. How did you find out?
It's really difficult. As long as I was focused on him, I actually did better. I was just so angry at the system. when at one point, I finally got Kevin to take his medication, and we had insurance, and the insurance company changed, and he went to see a psychiatrist. And she goes, "Oh, well, you can take that if you want, but to me, it's a placebo. Nobody ever really needs it." And he came home and immediately threw it in my face. "I don't need these meds." I tried to get her fired. I was so furious. And Kevin also found every website that said if you eat 5 oranges and stand on your head, you won't have a mental illness. As long as I was focused as being the one trying to lead the way, keep him on track, I didn't worry too much about myself. Where I discovered it was when my book came out. There are so many of us out there, so many of us with loved ones with mental illness. And I was asked to do a lot of speeches, and I realized that in giving my speech, I would begin crying. I could not stop the crying. And now Kevin's doing so much better. He's doing great. But still, when I think back, one of the worst moments in our life was he was hogtied by the police. He was laying on his belly. He had handcuffed behind him, his legs. They had him at the mental health center. And I went in, the officers, and they were taunting him, and they were making fun of him. "Oh, you really believe this, you know?" So I asked them if they could at least take the handcuffs off and stuff. And they did. And then I went back in the other room, and the image of your son handcuffed on his floor, having people make fun of him, that's tough. So what do? Kevin and I have a wonderful relationship. We get together at least once a week. We usually talk once a day. My loving wife has been crucial in helping me. And I think that this event changed both of our lives. And it sounds awful to people who are dealing with someone who's psychotic, but the silver lining to me was it gave me a purpose in life. I write a weekly blog. I spend 40% of my work week doing mental health, trying to help other people, writing articles, and it gave me a purpose. Mm-hmm. And Kevin will tell you it gave him a purpose. Yes. Yeah. And I think that's the only thing that keeps you from being utter despair. Yeah. The hardest thing for me is talking to parents who have lost their loved one. Because that, of course, is everyone's biggest fear. Yeah. And all I can say is, these are awful illnesses, and we aren't in control. And that was one of the hardest things for me to accept, was that Kevin's his own person. And I can't, if you ask a parent what they want for their child, they're going to say, "I want my child to be happy." Mm. Think about that. That's the one thing you never can guarantee. Yeah. You can teach them good morals. You can teach them financial management. You can help them out financially or whatever if you can, but you can't make another person happy. They have to achieve that.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And you obviously have found that for yourself as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I carry a lot of worry baggage. Thanks to my guilt-ridden parents who are very, very religious. So you never really can, feel good about yourself, because if you do, you may be a little too prideful.
You know what, Pete? I think every parent carries a lot of guilt-ridden baggage, And I've found that the things that we feel the most guilty about, our kids don't remember. If they're going to hold on to anything, it's something we've forgotten about.
Oh, Sadie, that was so perfect. So the year that Kevin is tasered, the year he's hogtied, we're riding together, and I turned to him in the car and I said, "Oh my God, I'm glad it's almost New Year's. This has been the worst year." And he looked at me and goes, "Oh, I thought it went pretty well." You were tasered, you were hogtied, and I thought it went pretty well. I was able, to do he made himself a rap album. He wrote some music, and I was going like, "Oh my gosh."
Yeah, exactly. So you've got this really successful blog, hundreds of thousands of people read it, and it gets picked up in the media quite a lot. You recently published a blog post about the lessons that you've learned about helping someone with a mental disorder. Share some of those lessons with us.
Well, I did this because I repeatedly get calls and emails from other parents saying, what do I do? What do I do? And I think the first thing you have to do, based on my own experience, because I'm not a doctor, is realize that these are serious illnesses. They're not going to go away. You can't wish them away. If you have bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, it is going to be a lifetime illness. It's something you're going to have to deal with. And so my wife likes all these sayings, that's why your windshield is so much bigger than your rear view mirror. You have to accept it's an illness, and then you have to understand the new normal. One of the things Kevin and I did early on was say, oh, I just wish it would go back the way it was. Oh, why can't we go back? It's never going to go back. So it's pointless to constantly worry about this is what could have been, or this is how Kevin should have been. Kevin is who he is. He has a mental illness. That's not going to change. And telling him, oh, why can't you just go back the way you were, is counterproductive, and it's dehumanizing. So, and the third thing I think is, as parents, is we want others to fix the problem, but the bottom line is you have to trust your own judgment, and you have to educate yourself. And what do I mean by trust your judgment? There was a therapist in the jail I met, and he said, my sister has schizophrenia. She's had more than 20 doctors. She was in her 50s. She's had more than 20 doctors. She's had all these case managers, but at the end of the day, who takes care of her? I do. And so you, as the parent, have to trust your judgment. Like the psychiatrist telling my son it was a placebo. No, it wasn't. You're an idiot. And sometimes you have to step forward, and you have to learn when to step back and listen to a professional. The other thing is, to do that, you have to educate yourself. You need to know the difference between a thought disorder and a mood disorder like bipolar, and a thought disorder like schizophrenia, and the bridge between them, which schizoaffective or bipolar 1, bipolar 2. You need to know what those terms mean. You need to know about medications. You need to know which ones are mood stabilizers, which ones are antipsychotics. And you also need to know what is available in your community. Do they have an alternative to taking someone to the emergency room or jail, which are actually two awful options? Emergency rooms don't know what to do, or they slap a Band-Aid on, or they just want to release the person. And jail, of course, is the last place you want someone to go. So you need to know, is there a drop-in center? Is there a mental health center you can go to? Is there a hotline? You need to know the law. Most states in the United States still require dangerousness, but there are alternatives to that: gravely disabled, unable to take care of self or others, or likelihood of dangerousness. If your person becomes psychotic, you need to know how to maneuver in the system. You need to educate yourself. The other thing I think you need to learn is that this affects your entire family. I have a blended family of 7. Every one of those other 6 were affected by Kevin's actions and his illness. My youngest daughter actually is a mental health counselor because of what she saw us and Kevin go through. But there was jealousy. Why does Dad always spend all his time with Kevin? Why is he giving Kevin these things and not me? And you have to figure out how to balance and listen to that. And you also have to understand that siblings have to reach their own relationship with the person who's ill. You can't simply say, love your brother, take him with you. Well, he embarrasses me. I'm not going to take him with you. These kind of things you have to understand there. I think the toughest thing is what Rebecca was talking about earlier. This is the toughest thing for me. You have to realize your own limits. If you can't tell from writing a book and blog and everything, I'm kind of a control freak. I want to control things. You can't. If this is a serious illness, there's only so much you should do. And you have to go back to what Rebecca was talking about, is sometimes you just have to step back. And if you're religious, throw it in God's hands. If you're not, just throw it on the other person or NAMI or something. You have to take care of yourself and understand you may not be able to fix this. This illness may kill your kid. That's the bottom line. I think that also you have to help that person empower themselves. We suffer because we love someone with a mental illness. But that person suffers way more than we are because they have a mental illness. I mean, Kevin used to say, why would I want to admit that I have an imperfect brain? You know, and I said to him, well, maybe your brain just thinks differently, you know, but you have to understand that it's person-centered. You have to understand we're poor judges. I just told you I thought maybe it'd been better if Kevin was never born. Well, look at him today. He's doing fantastic. We're poor judges of a person's ability. But the biggest thing that ties all this together in my book is hope. Yeah. You must have hope for yourself, and you must have hope and offer that hope to the person who's ill. Yeah. That first doctor who gave such a awful, draconian future hurt my son by stealing hope. Yeah. And that's essential to recovery.
I can't agree with you more. Hope is the biggest key, and don't give up, because there is a light at the end of the tunnel. Right. As dark as it may be, and traveling through it, it's hard. It's not easy, but it's got to persevere and keep that hope. So important.
For somebody who's watching this, who is new to this arena, you talk about, people having to know, get informed, become, an informed advocate. Where's the best place to go to get the information about, the legalities, the drugs, the whole process?
Well, unfortunately, it takes a lot of research. We don't have kind of a one stop. The best we have when it comes to that is groups like the National Alliance on Mental Illness in the United States. I'm sure in England and Canada, they have very similar groups. Mental Health America. There are groups out there that are basically grassroots that have local chapters. The essential, what we have to do is we have to get rid of the stigma, educate people early, and our schools can play such a key factor in this. Mm-hmm. We need to educate not only police officers, but we need to educate educators about this problem with the kid who acts up or acts odd or becomes violent, or, we have to recognize some of the early signs of a mental illness. I'm sure that if Kevin were in school and his teacher was educated, maybe she could have told us some signs, because I sure didn't see them. And, I think also we had to realize that there is a part of this that is so genetic that once it surfaces, you've got to get help to that person immediately. You have to, if I had known that, if I had been able to get Kevin right into someone who understood this and was, the problem, of course, is we have too few psychiatrists, where insurance companies only pay him for issuing pills. But once my son got a case manager who cared about him, then it was, Katie bar the barn door. He was ready to go. He accepted it, and he had someone on his side, It's very fundamental, actually. What does a person with mental illness want? They want the same thing all of us want: a safe place to live, someone to love them, and a purpose in their life.
Yep.
And that's it.
Yep.
We're almost out of time now. You mentioned about education. I just want to acknowledge one of our viewers. I've had an eye on the chat that's been going past, and Heidi had mentioned that she had a child in her class, a youth who had schizophrenia, and she encouraged him to tell the others. He was being bullied. She encouraged the child to tell the others how it felt for him, and the kids understood, and they stopped bullying him. So well done to you, Heidi, and we need more of that.
Yes.
Understanding.
Yes.
Understanding.
Yes, understanding. Compassion.
Yes.
Compassion is a huge key.
Yeah.
You know, when I was growing up in rural Colorado, kids with Down syndrome were picked on.
Yeah.
They were made fun of and all that kind of stuff. That doesn't happen now. In my kids' education, they understood that and they accepted them because of integration and classroom merging together. They understand this. We need to do the same thing with mental illnesses.
Yeah.
We need to have young people understand that, you know, yes, I have mood swings, or yes, I hear voices, and not be so terrified.
Yeah.
And not be terrified to talk about it, to be open, to be vulnerable. And I feel, I don't know about you, Pete, but I feel the trend is leaning towards that. People are becoming more educated. People are becoming more open to understand this and not judge the individual and have more compassion for them. And I cannot thank you enough for what you are doing. It's just remarkable. And thank you. It almost brings tears to my eyes because it is.
So important.
Well,
So
we all have a
important.
role to play, and you know, just talking about it. You know, I had people buy my book, and they said, "Well, I was on the airplane, but I took the book jacket off. I didn't want anybody to see me reading a book called Crazy." You know, that's the stigma that we have to fight.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what this program is all about, you know, helping to destigmatize. We are out of time now. Rebecca, is there anything you want to just ask? We've probably got seconds rather than minutes left.
Is your son embracing all of this with how you have helped him?
We're best friends now, and more importantly, he speaks and goes out and talks about his journey, which is so important because I can only tell it from the parent point of view. And at first I thought peers were, you know, not that important. Now I back them 100%.
Yeah.
Someone with a mental illness understands someone else with a mental illness.
Yeah. We have to leave it there, I'm afraid. Pete Earley, thank you so much. I'll say I enjoyed the book. I mean, it wasn't joy, but my God, did it educate me, as harrowing as it was. Yes. Thank you so much. And thank you for giving us an excerpt to give away on the Crack the Podcast website. So anybody who wants to have a quick look at that, you can also read a chapter on Pete's website, Pete Earley, EARLEY.com. That's it for today. We'll be back in 2 weeks' time with another episode of Crack the Podcast. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Pete.
Thank you.